Now, Israelis are marking the first anniversary of the Hamas attack that triggered a war which has sparked protests worldwide and risks igniting a far wider conflict in the Middle East. But for more on today and what is happening in that area, we cross now to SABC News Correspondent in Tel Aviv, Trent Murray. Trent, good morning. Of course, a year on. And we have seen now, especially in the past few weeks, what seems to be an escalation in the hostilities in the broader Middle East. But talk to us about today and how it's being marked in Israel.
Well, it was 6:29 a.m. October 7, 2023, that Hamas first fired off its salvo of more than 2,000 rockets into Israel before then breaching the perimeter fence of Gaza and unleashing what was the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And it is that 6:29 a.m. moment that really has begun the official remembrance services here. We know Israel's President Isaac Herzog has been in the south of the country visiting some of those towns and communities that were targeted by those Hamas militants, and he has also attended the site of what was the Nova Music Festival, where young people were partying at that festival when those Hamas militants arrived and killed 370 of them. We know, of course, flags are now flying at half-mast across much of Israel as people remember the roughly 1,200 Israelis that were killed in those hours that followed on October 7th. And of course, also I think reflecting on the sort of domino effect that it's caused with this wider war in Gaza. Over 40,000 Palestinians have now been killed there. And so I think it's just a real moment of reflection and remembrance here today. I mean, Israel is not a very big country. It's a population of around 10 million people. So it feels like when you speak to folks here, they all have some connection to October 7th in some way. They might know someone that was involved, or a friend or a family member. And I think for that reason, there'll be real efforts at this point just to try and support one another and remember, as I say, what was a very dark day. And in the words of one major newspaper here, a day that caused time to stop in Israel.
And of course, just looking at what Israel had set out at the time as the objectives to try and, of course, avenge in one sense, but also make sure that they at the time said that they wanted to demilitarize, but also just basically make sure that Hamas was nullified in terms of its military capacity. We look at those objectives that were set at the time and how Israel has fared in actually achieving those objectives, Trent. And also among them was, of course, the return of hostages. We heard the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu speak at the United Nations, where he said that there were 251 people who were kidnapped on that day. 154 were returned, of whom 117 were returned alive, which means you're still looking at about 97 odd hostages remaining in Gaza. So what is the latest on that front? And also in terms of knowing about the whereabouts and whether those hostages are still alive?
Well, I think for their families, they certainly are holding out hope that they are, and they're putting pressure on the Israeli government to do what they can to get them home. We've seen some of those family members camped outside the residence of Benjamin Netanyahu up in Jerusalem this morning, where they have been holding a moment's silence and prayer for their family members still in the Gaza Strip, but also again reiterating their calls for the government here to do what they can to get them home. The IDF continues to say that it believes a number of those hostages are still being held underneath tunnels underneath the Gaza Strip, which is why it's difficult to locate them. But in terms of the wider war goals, I mean, you're right. One of the goals when Israel went into Gaza was to demilitarize it and to try and degrade Hamas's ability to ever sort of launch an October 7th style attack again. And it would seem 1 year on, they are still not able to achieve that goal. I mean, in the past few hours, we've seen some more rockets be fired by Hamas into southern Israel. Around 4 or 5 were intercepted by the Iron Dome, but the IDF says it actually uncovered a plan by Hamas to launch a much larger barrage of rockets right at 6:30 a.m. when the ceremonies were beginning. They say they were able to locate those rocket launchers just before launch and were able to fire on them to prevent that large-scale attack. But I think that in itself is an admission, despite 12 years of bombardment, 12 months of bombardment, 12 months of death and destruction and fighting in Gaza, that Hamas does still retain some of its military capabilities, which, well, to me at least, would signal that Israel intends to remain in the Strip for some time.
We'll leave it there for this morning. Thanks so much, Trent Murray, our correspondent out in Tel Aviv in Israel. And do stay with the SABC News, keeping you up to speed with all of the developments in that region throughout the day.